We have a quorum of the task force. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is that a quorum? Yes. There's 11. Okay, why don't we, at 12, why don't we get started? I see Jeff. Why don't we get started? We have to begin with the reading of the electronic meeting script. So let me start from the top. Karen, would you do the honors of doing the calls? Is Karen on?
Yep, I am.
Yep. Okay. Would you do the? I will pass the virtual gavel to you. Alice is not with us again this evening, so.
Okay.
Okay. So, to conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, the Mason District SSPA task force needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in advance for your patience. First, because each member of the task force is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I am going to conduct a roll call and ask each task force member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that you each pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. I'll conduct the roll call. Robert Chamberlain. Robert, are you with us? Joshua Booth?
This is
Marty, were you able to hear me?
No, we didn't, Robert. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Robert Chamberlain in Alexandria, Virginia.
Thanks. Joshua Booth?
This is Joshua Booth in Lincolnia.
Jeff Longo?
Jeff Longo in Falls Church.
Alice Wang. Alice is not here. Barbara Burgess?
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Barbara Burgess. I currently am seated in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I normally live in Falls Church, Virginia.
Okay. Dave Nguyen? Donna Jacobson?
Hi, Donna Jacobson, Annandale, Virginia.
William Likos? Bill Likos?
Falls Church.
Bill, could you just say your name again?
Yeah, Bill Likos.
Thank you. Vinod Gupta? Vinod? Jan Keys?
Jan Keys, Falls Church, Virginia.
Karen Geyer-Smith?
Karen Geyer-Smith, Fairfax, Virginia.
And I'm Martin Machowski in Falls Church, Virginia. At this point, I will pass the virtual gavel to Karen Geyer-Smith so that I may be heard to make the requisite motion. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the Mason District SSPA Task Force.
A motion is on the floor. Do I hear a second? Donna seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the task force to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of the task force and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the task force may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated video and audio conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by registering through the meeting link on the Track a Plan Amendment page of the SSPA website at https://www.fairfaxcounty.gov/plan-SSPA/SSPA/track-plan-amendment, or by calling 1-844-621-3956 TTY 711 and entering access code 129-576-6262. It is so moved.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Donna again seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any,
Aye.
any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion has passed unanimously.
Finally, it is next required that all of the matters addressed on today's agenda must address the emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and/or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of the Mason District SSPA Task Force's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Robert Chamberlain seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. All opposed? Nay. Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. And I now pass the gavel back to you, Marty.
Thank you, Karen. I hope everyone has had just a moment to take a look at the agenda for this evening. We're sort of going to proceed in three parts. The first part will be the presentation of the staff analysis of the plan amendment, followed by a period when task force members will have an opportunity to put questions to the staff. We will then have a 10-minute presentation by the nominator. Again, after which there will be an opportunity for task force members to put questions to the nominator. And then we will open the meeting up for comment and question from the public for a period of time to accommodate anyone who'd like to ask, make a comment or ask a question. Any comment on the agenda before we move forward?
I just have a question. Did we get a copy of the information? I did not see it in an email, and if I need to go look on the site, I will.
Are you referring to the meeting information or the agenda?
I got the agenda. I did not get
Okay.
your plan.
No. So for the information that's being shared tonight, there was no information shared in advance.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so at this point, I'll hand it over to Michael and to Brian. I think you're going to be our leader on this to take us through the staff analysis.
Yeah, Michael, would you mind making me the presenter?
Is there a way that you can send the task force, like kind of in real time, the materials that you are going to be presenting tonight? Just so we can be referring to it as you present.
So I think most of the information that we have that we're going to share tonight is in PowerPoint format, but we can create a PDF of that.
I mean, I can.
For you.
Sure, I can.
If that'll help.
All right. Michael, you have access to convert it to a PDF, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Brian Boteo. I'm a planner with the Department of Planning and Development. I will go over the agenda again since you just covered it, Marty. But before I get any further, I want to, I think it's always good to take a step back and get some perspective on what we're doing here. We're studying a plan amendment, but what does that process consist of? So first, because this is a site-specific plan amendment, we started with a screening phase, which I know you all are familiar with. It pertains to a nomination that we received from a private party. The scope is then established by the Board of Supervisors authorization. That tells us what area we're studying and what we're studying it for, and directs us to take any additional considerations into account. And then we start the process of studying it. And at this point, we're guided by the plan amendment authorization and not the nomination that you all were considering last year. So last week, you got a glimpse of what we considered during the study phase when I covered the Annandale plan recommendations.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
Have we seen the note in the chat there that a few people can't access the meeting?
I had not seen that.
We have it. Go ahead, Brian. We saw that. Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay. Thanks, Robert. Then we start studying the plan amendment. So in this case, the wider plan for the Annandale CBC and the urban design guidelines are what we're looking at. And then we also assess the expected impacts. And then ultimately, if the plan is amended, it should generally conform to the higher level guidance found in the plan that we talked about last time, the different layers of the plan. And mitigations for the expected impacts should be identified. So both staff and the task force will make our recommendations. And as Michael stated last time, we usually make every effort to concur. And that recommendation may be to amend the plan. We may have different ideas about how to amend the plan, or it may be to reaffirm the existing plan. And then it goes to the Planning Commission, and then ultimately the Board of Supervisors, who has the ultimate authority over whether the plan is amended and what that exactly looks like. So the authorization, it's, as I said, it sets the terms of our planning study. It's depicted here. It's these two properties in central Annandale, 4312 and 4316 Ravensworth Road. One is the existing public storage and the other is a service station. And in total, the area is approximately 2.2 acres. There were also additional considerations in the board's authorization. And my apologies, we were authorized to study it at for up to 153,000 square feet of self-storage, approximately. And then there were also additional considerations that the board directed us to take into account to study the blocks, planned vehicular and pedestrian connections. They expanded the study area to include the service station that was not originally part of the nomination, and directed the amendment should be studied both with and without the additional parcel, and directed that design should allow for repurposing of the storage building to the commercial and residential uses envisioned for the Annandale CBC. So why would a plan amendment be needed in order to pursue this concept of this, approximately 153,000 square foot storage facility? It's an issue of intensity and the mix of uses for the most part. So under the current zoning ordinance, the property owner would be allowed to build a new storage facility at this site, although it would be capped at a lower intensity, just about 40,000 square feet. But in order to develop at a higher intensity, the property would need to be rezoned, and therefore would need the support of comprehensive plan guidance. The issue here is that the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance either discourage or don't allow storage facilities as a primary use at these higher intensities. And there's also a question of the feasibility of the repurposing guidance, which, one of our considerations up to this point has been that the same kind of barrier to having a single use at a high intensity exists with with pursuing this repurposing guidance. It doesn't provide any additional uses and doesn't address the issue of only having a single use. We'll get into that in a little more later. So moving on, and just before I get to our analysis, I want to quickly review the existing conditions for the site and the surrounding area. So there's 4312 Ravensworth, which is the public storage. It's approximately 1.76 acres. It's currently developed with approximately 37,000 square feet of self-storage. And then the adjacent property, 4316, is the service station, is approximately 1,700 square foot building. Both of these are accessed via Ravensworth Road here on the bottom. This is actually towards the east. And as you can see here, the public storage has relatively little frontage with Ravensworth Road. And again, that's another issue that we'll discuss a little more later. So here it is, located in the context of the surrounding blocks. Behind the study area is the Messiah Presbyterian Church. And then otherwise on the block, it's surrounded by low-rise commercial development. And then at the very bottom left, at the intersection of Markham Street and McWhorter Place, that intersection is planned to be reconfigured. So it will cut out a section of the parcel at the very southwest corner of the block. And then the remaining land where you see the trees there is planned for a new park. And then immediately to the west and southwest of that intersection, townhomes have been approved for development. And then the last thing I'll mention in terms of the existing conditions is that there is another existing public storage nearby. It's about 400 feet to the east of this one on John Marr Drive. So now that we've covered the scope of the planning study and the existing conditions, I'll summarize some of our considerations for this plan amendment study. So our evaluation is guided by two things. First is the concept's conformance with the existing comprehensive plan and the design guidelines. Now, obviously, this is a proposal for a plan amendment. So why should you care what's currently in the plan? Well, let's think back to last week. Remember that there are different layers to the plan, and each layer of the plan is informed by the layer above it. So while we're considering a plan amendment for these particular parcels, what occurs here should conform to the Annandale CBC plan. And that's really important to us. The Annandale community came together and produced this vision for how they'd like to see Annandale transform as a community business center. And we want to make sure that if the plan is amended, that it stays true to that vision for a walkable and active community. And then the second part of our evaluation is an assessment of impacts. For this plan amendment, our initial assumption had been that the impact assessment would be relatively simple, which is one of the reasons that it was placed on the expedited track. So first, I'll go over our evaluation of the conformance of this concept of conformance with the CBC-wide objectives. And the ones that the objectives in the plan that are most applicable to this study are objectives 2, 3, 6, and 8 of the Annandale CBC plan. So I have objectives 2 and 3 up here. Objective 2 states that the plan should encourage revitalization and redevelopment throughout the Annandale CBC that creates a more attractive and functionally efficient community serving commercial and mixed use area that emphasizes pedestrian amenities and circulation. So as my colleague from the County Department of Transportation will explain later, this planning study has given us the opportunity to identify some possible improvements for mid-block pedestrian connections, which would be an improvement over today. Unfortunately, we also have identified some issues if development here is pursued without parcel consolidation. As it relates to this objective, there's very little frontage on Ravensworth Road, most of which would have to be devoted to vehicular access, leaving little in the way of pedestrian amenities. Additionally, the use that we're contemplating here is not typically what we would identify as a commercial use, and it doesn't contain the mix of uses as recommended by Objective 2. And then following is Objective 3, which states that the plan should retain and enhance businesses serving the community and promote new residential development within the Annandale CBC. And this plan amendment would partially achieve this first part of the goal, or would achieve the first part of this goal, to retain and enhance businesses that serve the community. It, however, does not promote new residential development within the CBC. Then moving on, Objective 6 and Objective 7. Number 6 states the plan should encourage mixed-use development where appropriate and pedestrian-oriented destination-type uses, including restaurants and boutique retail, which promote pedestrian movement and facilitate human interaction. So a self-storage facility as a standalone use does not help to accomplish this objective. It's a single auto-oriented use that does not promote pedestrian movement or facilitate human interaction at the street level. And then Objective 7 states that the plan should incorporate planned roadway improvements which reflect context-sensitive design principles and include elements of complete streets. And complete streets are streets that are comfortable and engaging for people of all ages, all abilities, using a variety of modes of transportation, pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, motorists. My colleagues, Farouk and Laura, we'll touch on this a little more later, but complete streets are an important part of the vision for Annandale, and with no consolidation here, there's little space available to implement a complete street along Ravensworth. And then these objectives should be achieved through the guidance found throughout the rest of the Annandale plan, which some of which you'll remember from last time, and some of which we will we're going to dive into a little more detail on some parts of it. So part of the guidance throughout the entire CBC relates to parcel consolidation. The plan states that parcel consolidation is highly encouraged. Again, this is throughout the entire CBC as a way to achieve the planning objectives. That any consolidation should be logical and of sufficient size to allow projects to function in a well-designed and efficient manner and address transportation needs, particularly access. And importantly, any unconsolidated parcels should be able to redevelop in conformance with the plan. And that's an important consideration I want to stress to you all. Would the exclusion of the service station property from this planning effort prevent that property from achieving the goals of the plan on its own if it redeveloped at a later date? And does the idea that this plan amendment contemplates set a pattern that the rest of the block then has to conform to? And then as we covered last week, Annandale's form-based plan contains guidance for achieving those objectives that I mentioned a moment ago. Once again, the form-based plan contains 4 elements: a maximum recommended building height, building typology, recommendations on general and specific land uses, and urban design guidelines. So as I mentioned the last time, the study area is located in subunit B2. It's right here with the green star, which is recommended for buildings up to 6 stories in height. The incentive development option that I mentioned last week for additional building heights not available here. The authorization didn't speak to a change in building heights, and there wasn't one proposed in the original nomination, which envisioned a 4-story building. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I would just note for your information that the buildings are envisioned to be highest in general in the center of the CBC, and then they tend down in height towards the neighboring residential communities. And then again, you're all familiar with this graphic from last week. As you saw from the previous slide, this study area is planned for buildings up to 6 stories in height, which falls into the mid-rise commercial mixed use category seen in the middle here. There's a brief description here, which states that these are medium scale buildings with single or multiple users. They typically have surface parking behind the building or some limited garage parking, which may be in a separate structure. And it also notes that some consolidation may be needed for buildings of this scale. And then finally, on the far right, we have the design standards, which state that buildings should be oriented toward the street, that the main entrance should face the street, and that the ground floor should be commercial or a commercial use or live work. And once again, the authorized plan amendment does not meet these goals. It does not contemplate ground floor commercial or live work uses, and without consolidating, the building does not face the street. And then again, the third part of the form-based plan is the land use guidance. As I mentioned last week, that throughout the entire CBC, storage uses are specifically discouraged by the plan. However, it does leave an opening for their development. It states that if they are considered, that they should be a component of a mixed-use development and not the primary use. The reason behind that is that storage facilities, as I mentioned previously, are considered an industrial, auto-oriented use that's generally incompatible with the vision for a lively, pedestrian-oriented Annandale. So now we have the specific recommendations for subunit B2. You can see the major recommendations here on the right, but I will summarize them for you. It's planned for commercial or mixed-use development, a point I think I've already covered pretty thoroughly for the rest of the CBC. New streets and pedestrian corridors should be utilized to create separate blocks within the subunit. My colleague Farouk will address that in more detail a little later. The communal surface or structured parking should be considered to address parking needs, and that parcel consolidation for redevelopment is highly recommended. Another point that I've already covered, but as you can see again from this parcel map, without consolidation, constructing a building that's oriented towards the road and provides the streetscape that is expected in Annandale is difficult, and it may present problems for redevelopment of the service station as well, as plans as redevelopment for it may be envisioned later on down the road. And then finally, ground floor commercial uses are recommended with residential, office, or mixed use on the upper floors. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Laura Baker from the Community Revitalization section to talk about the urban design guidelines and how we're thinking about them in relation to this idea of a new expanded storage facility.
Hey everyone, thanks Brian. I'm Laura Baker. Thank you for having me tonight to talk a little bit about this. I thought we should probably start with a little bit more context related to urban design guidelines. The comprehensive plan for the Annandale CBC talks about, obviously, the importance of urban design as a pillar for the future vision. And it also specifically references urban design guidelines for Annandale. And design guidelines are really used to help further the goal of the comprehensive plan in terms of trying to achieve those larger elements. And we use them, obviously, when we're evaluating proposals, whether it be this or development projects that come forward. And if you don't mind, Brian, next slide, please. Thank you. In Annandale, or is it now turned over to me? Sorry.
No, I've got it. Should be on the next slide now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. In Annandale, we've had urban design guidelines that were created after the comprehensive plan vision was updated in 2010. And in the county, the way we handle urban design guidance is actually broken into 2 volumes. So we have volume 1, which applies to all revitalization areas and districts in the county, of which Annandale is one. And volume 1 really touches on broader urban design things like streetscape design, proper intersection design, landscaping, building placement, things that could be applicable no matter what commercial revitalization district or area that you're in. We also have a volume 2, which is more district specific. And so in 2011, design guidance was created for Annandale, which has been in use since that time. And most recently, within the last couple of months, we've actually been, well, it's been longer than that, but we recently went out to the community to try to gather some feedback on an update to the Annandale district specific guidance. And volume 2 typically provides some of those more character defining aspects of a place. So things like elements related to furniture or what the streetscape's going to look like, or things that are specific to a place, which helps tell you what is telling you that you're in Annandale versus that you're in Richmond Highway. So we've been working on that for the last couple of months and have been converting and updating that 2011 guidance to these updated standards. Next slide, please. So when we look at this proposal from a urban design kind of perspective, one of the things that's most important to us in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in Annandale, of course, is making sure that there's a relationship between the building and the street. Because as we make that conversion and transformation of Annandale from a more auto-centric community to one that has that mix of uses, that has places for people and connection for people in order to move throughout Annandale and to enjoy it as a place where they want to be, it's really, really important that your buildings have that relationship with the street. Another thing that's really important to urban design, of course, is access, and making sure that the access includes vehicular access, but also has direct pedestrian connections as well as connections to other properties. And then, of course, we are very concerned from a design perspective about parking. As Brian talked about earlier, we want parking to be, at the very least, if it's surface, screened from the public realm, so the areas where people see it moving through Annandale, but ideally would be structured or underground and somehow screened from view. And then finally, signage, which of course can be kind of a building element, but as well as a site element. It's extremely important that any signage that is introduced is building mounted, that's complementary, it's quality materials, in terms of something that's going to blend with the aesthetic and the character that Annandale is seeking. Next slide, please. And then touching on kind of the public realm aspect, we are always looking for projects to be able to achieve that future vision for the streetscape, right? Anything between the building and its relationship with the street to the travel lanes. So you can see here on the left, Ravensworth Road as it exists today. Obviously not a whole lot of space for people to enjoy it. And with the vision for Annandale in the future, we're looking to transform it so that we have a building zone directly adjacent to the building. We have a sidewalk so that people can move through an area. We have a landscape panel with street trees, landscaping, and amenity zones where you have elements in it like furniture, lighting, things like benches, trash cans. And then of course you have the roadway, and transportation will talk about that more. But this is an extremely important aspect. And so one of the challenges with the proposal, particularly if it's standalone within just one parcel versus both parcels, is that the ability to achieve that vision is significantly constrained with the existing frontage that the main property has. Next slide, please. other things that are really important when we look at urban design, of course, is all the architecture words: massing, modulation, fenestration, articulation, things that are really, really important to how a building looks, how it feels, and how it establishes that relationship not only with the street, but with its neighbors. And considering the new height of this building and its visibility, these are going to be really important details since it would be a new development. And given the use being proposed, we're going to be very interested in things like window treatments and screening of equipment and things like that. Final slide, if you don't mind, Brian. So going back to some of the things that Brian was talking about before in terms of what the comprehensive plan is trying to accomplish, the relationship of the building to the street and ground floor uses is extremely, extremely significant. Activation can be very difficult without having that relationship there to help create that vibrancy that we're looking for in Annandale, without providing things that are of visual interest and help enliven that space. So we are a little bit concerned when it comes to storage use as a standalone use, because as Brian has said before, storage uses, tend not to mimic those things that we're looking for in terms of being people-centered, something that's going to encourage you to bump into your neighbor. They tend to have more minimal staffing. They're very vehicular oriented. It's oriented about storing physical property versus providing a space for people to interact. So that is also kind of a concern when you think about vibrancy and what we're trying to accomplish in Annandale. And I think that is all I'm going to share on urban design.
Thank you, Laura. And so after going over the form-based guidance and those design guidelines, I wanted to show you all a few examples of storage facilities in the area that at least in part begin to address some of the guidance in the Annandale plan, both in the plan and in the urban design guidelines. These aren't, we're not necessarily saying that yes, we want this exactly, but there are elements of here of these that we see that begin to kind of address the considerations that we've had. So this is an example from the McLean CBC. So the storage facility that was constructed in 2012 and includes an office component. As you can see, the building is oriented toward the street and contains some streetscape amenities like a landscape panel. And then once again, this is another example in the region in Arlington. It was constructed in 95. It's approximately 100,000 square feet. And this is actually used solely as self-storage, but it does exemplify some of the site and building design and pedestrian realm recommendations that Laura just spoke about. It's located close to the sidewalk. It's oriented towards the street. And it helps create a more pedestrian-friendly environment. Some of the uses that would be discouraged and are less friendly to pedestrians are located off of the main part of the building. And then here's another example in Arlington, which again is only a single use, but it's a good depiction of how, again, orienting the building toward the street creates a more comfortable environment for pedestrians. And then this is an example of a mixed-use development from Toronto that incorporates self-storage. The ground floor consists of retail. The second floor is office space, and the exterior of the other upper floors are wrapped with residential, while the interior of the building is self-storage. This example is a little bit larger in scale than what we're contemplating here, but it does show one possible idea of how you could incorporate self-storage into a mixed-use development. that's in keeping with those plan recommendations that we covered earlier. And then this is another example of a mixed-use concept. The bottom floor consists of ground floor retail, multifamily residential units above, with storage units in the center. And then with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Farouk from the County Department of Transportation. And he'll cover some of the existing conditions for transportation. And he'll discuss in more detail some of those public realm and urban design recommendations as they relate to the transportation network. And then he'll also discuss some of the projected impacts from our transportation impact analysis, or rather, yeah. So, Farouk, if you are good to go, I can proceed to the slides for you.
I think so, yes. Thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. This is Farouk Hassanja. I'm from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. And my presentation will cover 3 parts of transportation analysis. One is, the comparison of the existing conditions of Ravensworth Road as opposed to what is recommended in the urban design guidelines in terms of right-of-way. And the second part will be about the internal connections, right-of-way requirements within the subunit. And the third one will be about the trip generation in different scenarios in our nomination. So to start with, the Ravensworth Road is the only access that the public storage parcel has currently. And then what we currently have in Ravensworth Road is a right-of-way of 85 feet of width, and then that consists of 2 northbound travel lane, 1 southbound travel lane, and then both directions with a dedicated left turn on the end, 2 Little River Turnpike in the north, and 2 John Marr Drive in the south. And both directions have a 5 feet on-road bike lane, and then 4 to 5 feet of sidewalk, plus the 2 feet utility panels. Could you go to the next slide, please, Brian? So as Laura mentioned, we have the Volume 2 Urban Design Guideline that specifies in more detail what a typical right-of-way consists of for different street types. And Ravensworth Road is considered as an avenue. So what you are seeing right now is what the Urban Design Guidelines dedicate or requires in terms of a typical right-of-way, or this will be a more ideal right-of-way for an avenue street type that consists of 2 to 3 travel lanes per direction, ideally with a median. And as you can notice here, it requires a bike lane on both directions of 5 feet of width, but it will be a raised bike lane as opposed to an on-road one. And it does have a wider sidewalk of 6 feet as opposed to 4 to 5 feet that Ravensworth Road has currently, and a wider utility plus landscaping panel of 5 feet. So especially with the gas station property taken into account to convert this property into a more active use, I think these are the elements that we need to take into account. In addition to the right-of-ways, there are building zones that are recommended outside of the right-of-ways that can actually actively contribute to the future use of this corridor. So that building zone can consist of, storefronts, outdoor dining options, etc. So this can be a very important element into contributing to the active use of the Ravensworth Road. Brian, next slide, please. So as to the second part of the presentation, so the potential multimodal connection within the subunit, as you can see here, our subunit is surrounded by Little River Turnpike in the north, McWhorter Place in the south, Markham Street to the west, and the Ravensworth Road in the east. And the potential internal connection can be created based on a grid, based on the northern and western borders of our public storage parcel. And I think that's one fortunate element here. And currently we have one driveway between parcel 13 and 15 that can actually be a potential, future north-south connection point for the public storage site. However, as I should mention that currently this is a private driveway with an easement and a deed related to it, dated back to 1946. So that will be one of the elements that we need to consider. But this may not be the only connection option we have for the north-south connection. There are different options. And especially this north-south connection can contribute to lead to the multimodal corridors in the north with with some bus stations currently along the Little River Turnpike. But in terms of the function of the internal connection, it may not be heavily vehicular because, as my colleague Tom Burke presented in the last presentation, the streets surrounding the subunit is actually, sufficient to provide the vehicular connection to the Little River Turnpike or the Ravensworth Road, which are the major, connection points of the subunit. So it can be mainly focused on the bike path connection. So that are the aspects that we need to emphasize in the future. Next slide, please. And for the internal connections, according to the urban design guidelines, there are the service street type of streetscape that we can use that can actually be sufficient to provide this kind of connection. As you can see here, it consists of one travel lane per direction, with bicycles sharing the road with the vehicles, and the typical sidewalks of 6 feet on both directions. But as I mentioned earlier, the vehicular connection may not be as necessary as in other subunits. So this can actually be narrowed down to a shared use path with sidewalks and buffers, from the adjacent properties. So it can be actually less than 40 feet of right of way that we might require in the future. Next one, please, Brian. And lastly, for the site trip generation, we took both the parcel as a single unit to adding the gas station property all together to compare the trip generations in the future. So we have three scenarios here. Existing means what is currently on the ground. Plant potential is what the comprehensive plan recommended, and then the proposed plan will be what this nomination is actually proposed. So we can see here in the final results what the current nomination proposed actually decreases traffic or generates less traffic than what the comprehensive plan proposes, but actually adds some traffic to what is currently on the ground. Mainly, you can notice that this is mainly due to the gas station property, because in the comprehensive plan, it was designated as a shopping center, or let's say a typical retail use in the future land use. So that will actually generate much more traffic than a gas station use. That's why you see 600 something numbers up here, as opposed to a smaller number that the storage parcel will generate on its own. So overall, it will generate less traffic than what the comprehensive plan actually generates. So that will be that wraps up our transportation analysis, and I can take questions afterwards. I'm sure you guys have a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Farouk. So that's actually a great segue because now we can talk about, shift from talking about the anticipated transportation impacts to addressing the other analyses that the county conducted. So just a general note, and you hinted at this, Farouk, when you specified it really, when we look at the expected impacts of a plan amendment, we generally are focusing more on comparing the current plan to the proposed plan, and not necessarily the current development to the proposed development. So there, for parks and schools, there are not any expected impacts because the authorization doesn't include a change in the planned intensity of residential or office. So there are no expected impacts in terms of student generation or park usage here. Wastewater, I noted that there is adequate capacity and had no further comment. However, there were improvements that were identified in terms of the urban forestry and stormwater, and these are really tied together. So the site is nearly 100% pervious. The plan notes, the Annandale CBC plan notes that the area's natural environment has changed due to development. There's little vegetation remaining within the CBC, and this in turn affects the health of Accotink Creek and the Cameron Run watersheds, which Annandale runs into. And it also impacts, the impacts to those watersheds may be mitigated by incorporating low impact development or LIDs, such as rain gardens or porous pavers or vegetated swales. And then another way to mitigate the impacts to those watersheds are the implementation of green areas. So landscape features with continuous plantings are important both on site and green streetscape as well. And then additionally, there was a note from Heritage Resources that the service station, they recommend a phase 1 architectural survey be complete on that prior to any redevelopment. It's emblematic of a classic ranch style shell service station. It was constructed in 1963. It's emblematic of the same style of other service stations of the era. You can see an example up top. They look strikingly similar. And then I'd like to leave you with a few concluding points. First, that the plan highly encourages mixed use and pedestrian-oriented uses. And second, that there are great hurdles to implementing the urban design guidelines without parcel consolidation. And these are really two of the primary considerations that we'll take into account when coming up with our recommendations. And we encourage you to take those into account as well. And then finally, before I turn it over to you all for discussion or questions, I'd like to leave you with one question of my own. And that's that, can this idea of a standalone storage facility, can it be implemented in a way that realizes the vision for the Annandale CBC and sets a pattern for future development of a lively pedestrian-oriented community? And so with that, we'll open for questions or any comments folks have, or if there's any discussion.
Okay, could we just put the screen back so we can see everyone, so we can...
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we go into questions from the, thank you, let me just change the layout here. Okay, are there, at this point on the agenda, we'll have some questions from task force members. Are there questions from task force members for the staff? Donna?
I have a question for Brian. When he was showing us the examples of the public storage and other areas and the ones that had incorporated residential living, and then they had storage, I guess, in the middle of the building. Was that storage only for the residents living in that complex, or was it for whoever wanted storage?
Yeah, I don't think those were public. So I don't think they were public storage of the company. I think they were other storage companies. But the self storage in those developments were not just for residents. They're normal kind of storage units that you would rent out to anybody as like in any kind of standalone self storage use.
And then I have a second question, and that is the road that was coming up. I think it was between partial 13 and 15. There's a road coming up to Little River Turnpike. I think, if I remember correctly, I think coming out of that, it would be difficult to do anything except for a right turn. Because I think there's an island or a medium strip in there in Little River Turnpike. I'm trying to remember.
I'm sharing my screen again. It's where this red arrow is coming up right here towards the north, towards the Little River Turnpike. That's what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah. I cannot recall if there's a median right there. I don't know if you can, Farouk. But it's something, as Farouk mentioned, that we've identified as a possible connection, but you know it's privately owned currently with an access easement. So there would be some challenges there that would have to be addressed before making any kind of vehicular connection.
That part of
to the
Little
property.
River features a turn lane in the middle of a 5-lane highway.
I see.
There's no
Good.
median in that part.
Okay.
But I would agree, Don, this is Clara Johnson from DPD. I would agree with Donna's observation, though. I think it would be challenging to permit left uses. This wouldn't be expected. This would be strictly for local trips, visiting those businesses. Just another alternative for moving around that space. And not just for cars, but especially for people and bicycles. But I think that's probably a good observation, that it would be right in, right out circumstances.
Other task force member with questions?
I have a question. I'm just curious, the previous sport and health, whatever the kid thing is called, that's defunct anymore. What is that currently zoned for, and what's going to happen to that?
I can check the zoning on that. I believe, off the top of my head, I believe that's zoned C8, the same as this parcel, but I can confirm that. I don't know if I'm not aware of any immediate plans to redevelop it.
So the closest residential to that would be Ravensworth Towers and the new townhouse community that's planned off of
Markham
at that
and
point
McWhorter.
McWhorter.
Yeah, I believe so.
Robert?
And
I'm sorry.
they can, the storage unit existing could, without zoning changes, build to 4 feet, four stories?
So currently it's zoned C8, which would allow them to develop at a 0.5 FAR, which ends up being around 40,000 square feet, a little less
So
than
just
that.
another 3,000 more than what they have. Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out in the county's study if an economic impact was done with respect to the consolidation piece, because assuming a gas station into this parcel, one is a much more lucrative or expensive 1/4 acre property versus the larger 1.8 acre. So how likely is it to happen? And by doing so, is it a way to try to deliberately preclude this otherwise outdated storage facility from doing any facelift or updates?
Hi, this is Elizabeth Haig with Revitalization. I think I'll take that one. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the county recently adopted the Economic Incentive Program. And by consolidating with the gas station, you would meet the minimum 2 acre consolidation requirement for the program. This program provides up to a 10-year real estate tax abatement for consolidation and redevelopment consistent with the plan. So we think that, in fact, that would be a very strong inducement towards the consolidation. So no, we don't feel that that requirement would kill the project.
And the other consideration then to kind of follow up with on that is the potential impact of a loss of another gas station headed down Little River, where we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, 3 of them or 2 of them at least at a minimum kind of disappear. Are we limiting options for gas stations from the stretch between where Alexandria starts all the way through to 495?
I mean, I think there's other gas stations in the CBC, but I mean, that's really hard to qualify or quantify.
Other task force members have questions? Let me just, it's not a question, more sort of a comment. It's sort of a little bit about the road we're heading down here. There is sort of this picks up on something Clara said at our first meeting last week in response to a question from Ed. There is an inherent tension between a vision, a plan for a community, and the interests, desires, opportunities for individual parcel holders. And that's a tension that is at times tough to balance. It can, and Clara also mentioned that there has not been a great deal of revitalization in the Annandale Central Business District so far. And we face the quandary of allowing one parcel to potentially redevelop it in a certain way that is inconsistent with that vision, and the next parcel redevelops in a way that's inconsistent with that vision, and the next parcel redevelops in a way that's inconsistent with that vision, and the vision becomes less and less valuable, and at some point unable to sort of really be implemented. So, and that's a tension on any redevelopment project. It's not simply this one, but it seems to be, you know, a little bit of a tension that we're seeing here between what we knew as the nominator's proposal and what we see as some of the staff concerns. And just perhaps that is a lead in to the next item on the agenda, which is the presentation from the nominator. And I would ask them, you know, to try to address that sort of tension between what you have originally proposed, some of the comments we've heard for the first time from the staff tonight. I know you've been in communications with the staff, and hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to you, and you've had an opportunity to think about this. So we'd love to hear sort of your reaction to some of the staff comments and how, you know, how your parcel can be redeveloped in a manner that is consistent with and promotes the long-term revitalization of Annandale. So with that, we'll hand it over and just ask you to try to keep it to about 10 minutes or so, if you can. And we'll have a period for Q&A after that, where you can obviously expand on responding to the questions we have.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can pull this share up here to the screen. Okay. Thanks very much. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us tonight. Again, you know, you've got staff give a pretty good overview, so I'm going to kind of cut through a lot of these pages here and just kind of cut to the meat of what we're talking about. As you know, this is the site, and you can understand what the proposal is. How we got to this was we first started, a lot of these buildings right here are kind of functionally obsolete. The building kind of sits in a divot in the center of the block. And, you know, the building is almost completely 100% impervious. The site is almost completely 100% impervious. There's some non-impervious areas right here and up at the front, but it's basically 100% impervious. There is no stormwater management control other than the basic drain system there. And, you know, it seemed to be an opportunity to say, okay, well, if we were looking at how this property is going to redevelop and this block is going to redevelop, is there a way that we can go ahead and redevelop the property in a way that kind of starts providing the basic infrastructure, probably the first green shoots for this block, you know, of which a framework can be built for future redevelopment. And I want to just start off also kind of talking a little bit about self-storage and some of the concepts that we're talking about here. You know, what we're looking at doing here, you know, I think when people, when they see here, they see the kind of classic self-storage, which is just kind of the garage doors or just a door, non-climate controlled. And that's not typically the future that you're going to find for self-storage. Self-storage works in an urban environment, an urbanizing environment, and it really works in a much more symbiotic relationship with that. As apartments come forward, as multifamily develops in an area, you know, this is almost a necessary echo boom to the apartment multifamily boom. And particularly as we get units that start getting smaller, and that tends to be the industry trend here, where we had, units were typically 1,000 square feet. Now they're about 790 square feet total. And you're looking for places that are, secure, climate controlled, high-end buildings, where people can take and kind of change stuff out with the winter and the like. But also one of the most interesting trends we've seen over the last 6-7 years has been the emerging impacts on retail and how people are using retail in the retail economy. And we're finding more and more, up to about 30%, I think in the last earnings calls they talked about 30% of this unit actually gets used as storage space by local retail. So you have, and one of the examples was typically if you have a shoe store or something like that, they'll put a lot of the stores right there. They'll have more space towards the sales space, and you don't have the kind of classic thing where you had kind of a large wall and a bunch of storage behind it. And that allows them to, have a more effective retail uses. So that's kind of the way we do it. And there's pretty good examples. You'll find it all over in downtown DC and most of the other areas. And the CBCs, that's how they work. And they really do support other development in the retail of development in multifamily in a CBC. And, then the question becomes, can you do that in a building that is architecturally compatible and looks like it fits in? And we saw some pretty good examples tonight. Some of the staff brought up. And, they function in, they fit in well. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. We also realized when we looked at this, we had some extra land area that would basically provide the kind of a good landing strip here for future roadways, connections, bike paths. It can be open questions to whether it's vehicular connections. We can certainly accommodate vehicular connections, we'll explain here, or bike paths, or both, and some open space as well. So talk a little bit about that. As we talked about here, it's kind of the same thing. In the center of the block, we're kind of a low point right here. The existing improvements are old 40-year-old buildings. We can go ahead and we can just basically redevelop those by right and just keep it kind of about where it is, maybe add a little bit more there. But that doesn't really help the community. It doesn't really help the redevelopment of the area. So we're trying to deliver something that's we think much more reflective of what the community is going to need in the future. The staff report and talked about what the recommendations were coming out of here. Study the subunits, plan streets and guidelines, pedestrian corridors, should allow for the conversion of commercial to retail or residential. And we do that. We'll explain that when we start thinking design. We're planning for an entire bank of conversion to first floor commercial when that opportunity comes along. Plans for expansion with and without the gas station property. The first step we took in this process was approach the gas station property. It had been purchased about a year and a half beforehand by another company. And they put quite a bit of money into fixing it up, and there just was not interest in doing. That's what they do. You have to respect that. So they said we're not interested in redeveloping the property. We just bought it. We're planning on keeping it. And then some of the other things we got to consider is the eventually widening of Ravensworth. And we saw part of the staff report saying there's ultimately possible right of way up to 83 to 101 feet per the Annandale design guidelines. How would that impact the frontage of our property? So we're trying to, our designs are to incorporate that as well. And then when we looked at the internal road network, we talked about vehicular connections. We looked at the same 40-foot wide service road dimensions and how to lay that in there. So when you saw the staff, and the staff had that kind of grid network there, we can accommodate that, or we can accommodate something that varies from that as the rest of the block builds out. But we're providing the basic infrastructure for that. Talked a little bit about concept one. We're going to just launch into this real quickly instead. Here's our first concept. All right. First concept, what we're doing is taking this area we had right here was a kind of our pipe stem. We had parking there, creating that, and that's going to be a big improvement for an environment. Open space. We're also doing modern stormwater management controls here. And as we'll talk later on, maybe you have the opportunity for, at some point, a future park if the widening takes out the gas station, which it may very well. But we talked about, what were we doing here with regard to, the roadway infrastructure. You've got this potential east-west connection here. We're talking about doing a reservation. We look at the 40-foot wide connection here. In the 40-foot wide connection, you've got traffic going this way, traffic going that way. We've got a 6-foot bike path. We got a 6-foot sidewalk here. We have the ability to make, we talked about that connection right here. We can make that connection there. Maybe it turns out that connection is not really where it wants to go. Maybe it wants to go up here. Maybe it's something that's a through block, a completely through block connection. We've got the ability to connect in through here. We've got the ability to connect in down there. Again, providing the basic infrastructure and the ability for the area to completely redevelop. We talked about, first floor retail and office. You know, we've got our office right here. We've got the ability to, and we did this in the city of Alexandria as well. The ability to put, you know, bays here for first floor commercial or conversion to first floor commercial when the opportunity comes around. You don't want to have empty bays, but yeah, that's an easy thing to do. That's just restructuring the first floor. You know, and you can, and with the architecture, we can work with the community on the architecture to find design. We've had a couple designs already, and we're working on another site right now where, you know, the county had an architect they liked and give them some good ideas, and we're able to mimic that and work with folks to find mutually acceptable solutions for that. Again, that's just architecture. But, you know, this is ways where we can start, you know, providing the basic infrastructure for the redevelopment of this entire block. So you've got, this can accommodate the full 40-foot drive here. You've got the ability to accommodate the 40-foot drive here. You know, we are here keeping, you know, not planning on doing that initially, but it'd be a reserve if the county wants that. What we're really trying to do, and we talked about here in the staff report, how they really would like to see more green and more landscape. And we're looking to do that the entire perimeter of this property right here. And we haven't even talked about what we're going to fill that with in terms of trees, vegetation, stuff like that. But, you know, those are benefits to the environment. Those are benefits to stormwater management. You know, those are a positive impact from a standpoint of urban forestry. You've got your activation here. You know, when the time comes, as the area develops, you'll have the ability to convert to that, or you can, you know, the office will be there right now initially. You may not have people, you know, you may not ultimately want folks to be on there, but we've got on-street parking that match the same, you know, design that we saw when we talked about, you know, the Annandale design guidelines. We went ahead and took a very serious look at that. All right, now also thinking about what is the street frontage here. We know if we can't consolidate this, we need at least design this way so it has an attractive front here, connects in with this future right of way, and we have open and green area. Maybe that's privately maintained right now, but it's open to the public. All right, but let's take a look at, you know, that gas station right here. Right now, and we've seen this in other areas where when the roadway widens, and you're talking about, you know, going from 50 to 130 feet, you know, out there, and that's for your bike path, your trees, and, you know, the sidewalks and your landscaped areas, and that's just right to there. When that happens, you know, remember that there's also a taking for temporary construction. That taking for temporary construction, because you don't construct directly in here, you construct, you're doing all that activity here. That typically is some about 20 to 30 feet. We're seeing that right now on Richmond Highway. All right, well, you're already at this point taking out gas pumps. You know, you may be probably taking out more during highway construction. Maybe there's a way for us to work together with those folks, you know, to give them part of this land to stay there, if there's an interest by the community to do that. Or maybe the opportunity is what we're looking to do for option 2. This is our future street grid we're talking about. And that's where we say, okay, maybe if the county ends up having to take all that for part of the roadway widening and there's not much left, the county keeps it. We dedicate this land right here. You have another urban park. You know, maybe it's a dog park, maybe it's, you know, some sitting area, maybe it's just a commons area. But you have that right next to a new future public street. You have a public street right there. You know, and you've got the building here that has met what the community wants in terms of architectural design guidelines, provides the street frontage, provides the bike lanes, the pedestrian lanes, the vehicle lanes, the on-street parking in the configuration called for, and the first floor activation on that right of way. So these are some of the, you know, the thoughts we're camping on here. And again, asking to be given the chance to work with the community to find this as a solution that can maybe work long-term for the benefit of Annandale and for this block and begin the first green shoots of development. This is not 100% self-storage. This is a mixed-use project. A mixed-use project with potential for commercial on the first floor. It's got office. Yes, it is predominantly a self-storage. But right now, the building, it is 100% self-storage. You know, so it's just a question of, do we want to keep where we have right now? Admittedly, we would still go redevelop it and, you know, to something nicer than what we have right now, but just kind of by right, or have it in a way that provides kind of the, you know, the infrastructure to allow the future redevelopment of the other area and allow for investment, new development, and you know, roadway and vehicular connections and pedestrian connections that would maybe aid the community as the community builds out. And, you know, and I don't say this lightly, but provides a use that, you know, people are sometimes somewhat dismissive of for some reason, but, you know, is a very necessary use for an urban environment, you know, both from a standpoint of making multifamily viable, but also from commercial. So that was basically what we wanted to talk about here. And with that, thank you very much for your time. I think I've gone through 10 minutes, so I'm going to be quiet and take your comments.
Thank you, Mark. Again, we get the screen back so we can see who wants to.
How do I do that? Sorry, I'll hijack the.
There should be at the top of your screen an orange bar that if you hover your cursor over it, you can.
Sure, I got it.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Okay. Mark, thank you, and thank you for staying within that 10 minutes. Appreciate that. Are there task force members who have questions for Mark?
This is Dave Nguyen. I have a question.
Hey, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to check with the developer that what would be the worst case scenarios in terms of planning this out? Let's say without the partial consolidation, how would the planning be envisaged, and how would that impact the surrounding areas and the economic impacts also?
I don't know if I'd call it worst case scenario, because what would, if ultimately, if there's not a consolidation with the gas station parcel, it would be basically what we're looking to do here. If there was a consolidation of the gas station parcel, I guess that kind of begs the question, what's in it for the gas station owner? Do we want to have continue to have a gas station there? And is the gas station consistent with what we want as part of the Annandale? And if it is, we can work with that too. But if it's not with a gas station, and recognize if Ravensworth is truly widened, or even if not widened, just the lanes stay the same, but we provide all these lanes, there is going to be a deleterious impact to that gas station, just from the erosion of its frontage as it pushes in there. And it's not just the loss of the gas station, pump stations like that, it's the loss of turning radius. I think we're trying to get and I represent gas station owners, trying to get a fuel tanker in there, a fuel tanker out of there. You have to have enough space to get those vehicles in and get them out when you're typically doing a 5,000 or 6,000 gallon fuel tanker.
Donna, I saw your hand.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I have a question that actually would affect, I think, the public storage, even the way it is now. I know the Board of Supervisors just recently passed ZMOD, which is going to go in effect on July 1st. And as part of ZMOD, home-based businesses are basically going to be easier to operate, except for residents need to get permits, if a special permit if they're going to have customers. How would public storage, if a resident had a business and was storing their retail in their storage unit, how could public storage prevent residents from just bringing customers to the storage unit and doing business through there?
Do that through the terms of how you serve customers and stuff like that, part of their lease agreements. People don't bring it. We've gotten comments from, and apparently this happens in DC. Sometimes people will sleep in a unit or something like that, or maybe that used to happen. These are very, very high end, secure. You go in there, you have to have a key to get in there. You are monitored. There is climate control. And remember, you can't have any of that stuff because we still have insurance requirements. So you just control that through. We have an office there. We have managers. And everything's on video. You can't be conducting business there. That means if say you were a Foot Locker or a shoe store or something like that. And that was the example I was most given. Yes, you'll probably have a guy when we come there in the morning and grab however many shoes you think you need, or what we're also starting to see is kind of this last mile delivery, where people are increasingly ordering what they want, online, and having it shipped to the store. The store gets this stuff, and they've got a whole bunch of extra stuff, and customers will say, okay, I'll be in on Thursday or something like that. So they don't want to keep it there, so they take it to the unit. So you've got basically a person coming there once a day, sometimes twice, to change out product and pick up product. But the retail industry and the commercial transactions are all handled in the stores.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and then Robert.
So, is there a reason why you haven't gone after, for instance, like the parcel consolidation with the the arrangement that Elizabeth had, it gives you that the tax deferments, and then just do a lease back for the gas station until until Ravensworth expands?
Be willing to explore that. I mean, you have to have, I mean, it's not us who are saying no. You have a property owner who bought the property, put the money they need to put into the property, and they have it operating, and they're, you know, a very thin margin business, and they're happy doing what they want to do. And, you know, and frankly, we kind of respect that, because that's in many ways what public storage does on other some of its sites, where they get in there and they just want to do what they want to do. And, you know, they just operate there in perpetuity, and they're not really there to kind of redevelop and become the highest and best use, or sell it to like a new apartment developer. But, you know, in certain areas we do that. You know, in this case, you know, if this landowner decided, hey, they'd like to do that, you know, I guess we'd have to figure out a structure to deal there, and we'd have to figure out how we could do that, you know, in a way that meets the purposes of the EIP. And really, it's kind of the burden, not the burden, but it's up to that property owner to decide how this works for them, because they're willing to take their use down for 2 or 3 years while this is reconstructed, and then come back in. And that also really kind of begs the question for the community: does the community want to see the gas station back there? It sounds like there are folks that might want to see it, folks that might not. You know, it's, you know, we're not saying no on our side. If that is helpful.
Okay.
Robert?
I had another question.
Okay.
This is actually for staff regarding the option 2 that was presented, where the gas station ends up turning into a park. And you know, I know that the urban use guidelines say that we want to have you know, the buildings facing the street, but how about when there's a park in between the you know, in between the building and the street? You know, is that something that is acceptable to staff, or is that something that is frowned upon?
Hi, this is Clara. Let me try to say, and maybe our revitalization staff can add to it. When you're placing an urban park somewhere, it's also important to have active uses around that park, so that it becomes a usable park, an attractive park, right? You need that to attract people to it. So I think that would be a consideration. It just goes back to that general idea of how can you incorporate some active use along with the self-storage? You know, can we do that? And then I'm sure Mark can answer the question of just, you know, how do we accomplish some of these goals with a single use, just the single use, because it would still be the single self-storage use, even if in the future it might be convertible. Again, back to that tension of when do we get that active use? And I think the zoning ordinance and the plan, the guidance now is you need to come in with 2 uses. I don't know if that answered your question about the park, though. And Liz, Laura, it didn't.
Can I jump in a little bit too?
Yeah.
And Laura, feel free to add. But so, Clara's exactly right. Usually you have some kind of a restaurant or retail use that helps drive traffic to the park. The other way to do it is to actively design and program the park space along with a use. So if that's something other than just giving us a patch of green space next to a gas station, you know, actively programming, committing to a long-term programming and interesting uses on the space, allowing for, you know, I don't know, food trucks, kiosks, something. We do have guidelines for interim development. So, but you know, that's very complicated, and that's really dealt with more, I would say, kind of in a zoning level than a comprehensive plan level. So we're of course at the comprehensive plan stage. It looks like Laura's on.
Mark, you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. I was hey, thank you very much, Liz, because I only had so much time to talk, but you know, you hit on. We started talking about, if you remember my phase 1, we had that called the patch of green. You know, there were a lot of really cool, fun things you could possibly do with that. But we're literally like you know, maybe a mini like public art and a sitting area. But we also thought about, things as you're talking about, maybe it's a food truck or maybe it's something like that. But, you've got this area where you could do some fun things with it. You got to recognize that at some point that green space is going to be impacted by the impact of by widening of Ravensworth. And so temporarily it will be disrupted, but then, it will go back to the new conditions that after Ravensworth widened. It just may also incorporate, if the county ends up having to take the entire gas station, the county's going to have that land, and then, we're happy to dedicate this land. Presumably at this point, we've dedicated, we put a reservation, the county's taken the internal roadway connection. When we talk about street frontage, we chose our office as best we could to put, that frontage at least on Ravensworth. But, when that through road comes in there, we've got that convertible area too. So we've also got street frontage there. But, no one's saying no. We're actually saying there could be some fun ways to think about how to program this little space and recognize, and is there a way to, if you look, there's a lot of really cool little restaurants in the area and stuff like that. Is there a way to maybe provide, some space that maybe allows folks to go there and sit down and eat outside? Just things to do. But, it'd be initially a temporary open space. Post Ravensworth widening, it would be programmed, with a larger space maybe, or we'd have to figure out how to do it in there. But that's
the challenge is to make these kind of spaces work, and that's where certain active uses like restaurants and things really help that. And again, the problem with this is that the comp plan is going to have general language. At a zoning level, they could make commitments to program the space, but I don't think we could at a planning level. I think there's things that you could do at the zoning level that you couldn't do at the planning level.
Okay. Robert, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Mark, to what level are the buildings constructed in terms of environmentally friendly? We spent a lot of time in this run-up process, really concerned about stormwater management, specifically in a number of areas, and both of your concepts, they still show a large amount of roof and or coverage. And so are we doing a green roof? Is there solar? Is there rainwater gardens or LEED silver?
Yeah, we do, NGBS or LEED, depending on whatever like that. But yes, the roofs are equipped so you can retrofit for solar, when it comes in. And frankly, we're already looking at that at a different site right now. But yes, that's very much it. And then of course, on top of all that, you have basically no quantity control, no quality control right there. You just got a drain system right now. And so you're reducing the amount of imperviousness. You're also providing modern stormwater management controls for there. And yes, it's sized for us, but we'll probably have to upsize it a little bit because the reality is we sit in a divot. We do get people with stormwater from other things too as well. So we just got to account for that. But, it should be from a standpoint of, more trees, more green, better stormwater management, LEED certification, the ability, to go solar. It should be a lot of environmental advantages here. And then that's not even counting what we might do from a community standpoint with a green space though. And Liz's comment about, doing rezoning, we would love to maybe work with the community, come up with get a little more closer ideas than you probably get in a comp plan process. And then say, okay, public storage, we're going to hold you to it, do a companion rezoning that goes through it, and we have to be held to that standard.
Other task force members have questions? Mark, let me ask, you've tossed around a number of ideas, some fun ways, as you said, to sort of, make this somewhat more in line with some of the concerns the staff has raised. And notwithstanding Elizabeth's comment that this is the comprehensive plan process and not the zoning process, we as a task force are only dealing with the comprehensive plan. We won't be involved in a rezoning application. But assuming for the moment, given the economic incentives that may exist, that there is some opportunity to do something with the gas station, would you be in a position to sort of do something that was attractive, that what self-storage was one use, but not principally the primary use, but something that more dramatically addressed and more directly addressed the concerns the staff raised in their earlier presentation? you have 40,000 square feet of self-storage there now. You're asking to go to 153,000 square feet. That gives you a lot of room to, and that's without the gas station property. That's you're asking for a lot. I mean, in a perfect world, and because the Board of Supervisors actually directed that we look at these parcels together, what, as the owner, as the landowner, what would you guys be willing to begin to consider to address the staff concerns?
I think, that's what we're trying to do right now is, looking at, this first floor retail activation, the office, the environmental benefits, the through road infrastructure, stuff like that. If there are additional opportunities to, again, that's kind of part of the iterative process of working with the community. Is this site big enough that you can have someone else come in there and do a self-storage with an apartment wrap around it, like we saw one of those examples? It's not that big, and you've got to have willing property owners around you. And in many ways, that's the goal, is to get this and hopefully begin this to be kind of a catalyst for the area, and and then it allows that to come in there. But
right,
ultimately this is what they do.
Let me speak specific to the issue Clara raised on the retail activation of the ground floor. That's at this point, as I understand it, that's a thought for a future conversion. Would you consider sort of a requirement that be part of the building up front and not
Yes.
conversion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did exactly that in the city of Alexandria recently. And the difference here being there, is people don't like to have vacant space. And so if you put it in initially, you may have a situation where you might have more deleterious effect. But we actually, the city of Alexandria, we're an area where it's programmed for big redevelopment. We have an entire series of banks of future maker spaces and retail spaces right there. And that market is probably more developed for that. This is not going to be recognized. This is on, an internal road, so the question of marketing is like that. But, we're just trying to, we put it as a condition, absolutely fine with having it as a condition and having a trigger point. I just think we need to kind of talk more about it. What's the appropriate trigger point so it looks good when it comes in, rather than become something that has excess space that competes against other people.
This is Liz Haag again. One point to consider about that is retail needs to have visibility, and that's part of the issue with it being set back on this pipe stem shaped lot. If you put the retail back there, and I think Mark alluded to that, there's a risk of it just sitting vacant, which doesn't do anybody any good. And so that's part of the problem, and why the consolidation was attractive, because it brings any building footprint out to the street. You have a greater chance of retail success or other commercial use success being closer to the road.
Right. Robert, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I didn't realize before
Bill,
I was still muted prior. I wanted to go back to the idea of that open space and kind of just throw it out somewhat to Mark, but also to the other task force members, and also get some staff feedback. If there was an opportunity to include a mandatory solar requirement with battery, to then take that pipe stem area into an electric vehicle charging station, are we perhaps accomplishing two goals in a different way, which doesn't drastically increase the vehicle traffic to the area? And I just wanted to throw that out there, because that's kind of where I was trying to go with how is the building constructed? What is the county plan for renewable energy moving forward? And could we align those goals if we can't get a willing owner of the gas station to want to divest of an asset they only bought 2 years ago?
Okay. Bill?
I just went back to,
okay,
I would say, with your comment, I think you're hitting on something here, and that is also the business model for gas stations. Presumably we'll still have gasoline stations, for many years or something like that. But at some point, we are going to be migrating more towards an electronic vehicle thing. Electronic vehicle charging and stuff like that doesn't require a 6,000 and 5,000 gallon fuel tanker to come in there and unload. It's literally just tied to the grid. We see this all the time. So you may have the opportunity for, even if the road is widening, to have this be part of an assemblage with that for a future, maybe a replacement in a like kind use, just more modern, using electronics versus electric charging versus gas.
Okay.
We'd
Bill
be willing
Ecos?
to be part of that too.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I'm been following along here, and I'm trying to connect the dots to all of these potential scenarios that may develop if there's widening, if the gas station closes, if, and a wonderfully accommodating representative of the owner in that regard. But I thought that the scope of our efforts was to see whether the nomination at this point was consistent with the comp plan and the intentions of the Annandale redevelopment plan. And on almost every level, it seems inconsistent, and only becomes consistent if some far-ranging down the road scenario were to develop. Now, I'm not sure that in my experience that I've ever seen the widening of a road precipitate a better pedestrian-friendly environment. And yet that seems to be what we're coming back to here, because that might be the incentive for the gas station not to continue to operate. I think I would be much more comfortable in dealing with this question in the here and now. Does the application, as it is structured, meet the objectives of making the Annandale Business District more pedestrian friendly and all of those points that the staff's outlined so well earlier? So I'm kind of at a loss here as to what we're supposed to assess. Is it the potential for future promises, or are we to take a hard look at what the nomination is based on what we have today and assess its compatibility with the Annandale plan?
I'm happy to respond to that if you want.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Legos. Let's think about what we've got today. You've got self-storage out there. So what are we looking to do? And let's not even talk about the gas station. Let's not talk about riding of Ravens. Let's just talk about our property. Either A, the proposal goes forward, or B, it just goes back to operating the same way it is, albeit modernized. And that's worked well in Annandale for a while, but you've lost that opportunity and it isn't future wonderful things that are happening with the highway and the gas station. You've lost that opportunity to have the beginnings of that internal construction, the roadways, and for everything we want, the environmental stuff, that's going to allow development to start happening on adjacent properties. We're talking about internal pedestrian connections, vehicular connections, things that are going to serve adjacent properties and allow them to redevelop themselves. Irrespective of what happens at the gas station, irrespective of what happens at Ravenswood. Let's just think about the properties between our property and Little River Turnpike. This will be a road network that serves those properties. The same thing between here and Markham. That is what's going to happen there. And we know if we look at the comp plan, that is what's intended. That's intended to be a larger mixed-use development. But it's also that plan also calls for having a road network. It just doesn't specify where the road network would be. This is the most logical way for this to happen, and this is the core and the crux of it. That's what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Mark. But staff.
Mark, if I could respond for a minute, Mark, I appreciate that, but again, we're buying on the potential here. I'm not sure how the redevelopment, even if it's the improvement of the existing self-storage internal to a block, provides, even with new access, provides tremendous incentives for the redevelopment of any parcel outside the ownership of the self-storage facility. It seems to me that the group, the task force, ought to be mindful of the county's incentives for consolidation and not make decisions that move forward and remove that incentive from the gas station, from the property owners that are facing Little River Turnpike and the others, for future consolidation that would allow for a parcel substantial enough to really meet the future needs and be consistent with the Annandale plan.
All I'm saying is, you know, if this doesn't go forward, the self-storage stays the way it is, and those other properties are fully free the same way they are now to consolidate, take advantage of the EIP, and develop the way, you know, everybody wants them to happen in the plan. This does not prevent that from happening. You know, it does facilitate easier development because it's providing the roadway and network that is allow that to be served.
Okay, thank you. Karen, you had your hand up?
I do. Thank you very much. Mark, you have mentioned a couple times the increase in the internal pedestrian traffic. How do you see that working? And let me preface that with when my vision of what the Annandale Comprehensive Plan is to have a street front on Ravensworth. You've built a street front on the inside. How do you see increased pedestrian traffic?
As the area continues to densify, as the CBC continues to redevelop, you are going to need an internal road network. You know, roads that go between Ravensworth and Markham mid-block, roads that go from McWhorter, you know, to that mid-block, and then maybe through there to Little Road Turnpike, or go through there. It's the typical, just the classic kind of internal road network. These are not main roads; these are kind of internal roads, and that's why it's designed that way. And which you see are reflected already in the comprehensive plan. That's why we designed it to using the service drive, you know, network widening, the 40-foot wide that we used in the Annandale design guidelines.
Have the structures around the property been rezoned out of commercial? Because except for the townhouse, everything else is commercial.
Goal is for all that to be, you know, mixed use residential.
I believe it's all commercial.
It's zoned commercial, but the subunit is recommended for
Or
a
mixed
mix
use
of
if they can
uses,
consolidate them
including
like we always
residential.
hope they can.
Yeah.
For the last 20 years. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from task force members before we open this up to the public? Seeing none. So let's open this up to questions from members of the public. I don't believe we received any written comments in advance. Is that right, Michael?
That's correct. No comments received.
And has anyone signed up to speak this evening?
We have a few folks in the attending list. I think most folks are panelists tonight. So I'll call out.
Why don't we just ask, are there people listening in the public who would like to, is there a mechanism for them to do that? Could you manage that?
Yes, there should be a hand symbol next to your name in the attendee list, I believe. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, so at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there should be a button for participants. There's a little silhouette of a person with 3 little bars at the bottom. If you click that at the bottom right-hand little bar on the participants window, there's a square icon that looks like a hand in it. If you click that, you can raise and lower your hand.
While we're waiting for that, I just wanted to highlight just one thing that was mentioned in chat. That Mark, a couple of times you've mentioned that if the redevelopment doesn't happen, we don't get the you know, some of the ecological benefits or whatnot. And if you rebuilt by right, you still have to meet current stormwater control requirements. So that I just wanted to point that out to other task force members that I mean, yes, you're planning on introducing more green space, but you know, you've mentioned a couple of times that you've got it's just a drain. There's, you know, no stormwater controls right now. If you do any kind of redevelopment, you would have to, you know, you'd have to introduce new stormwater controls, and so that doesn't seem to hold a lot of weight, Mark.
Actually, what would happen would be, you're correct. If we were to redevelop it, say we scrape a lot and came back with the same amount of density, we would. If it was, well, the plan here would basically just re-roof the thing and just do the building permit level stuff, just kind of fix it back up. That is not going to rise to the level of redevelopment. But you know, anyway, that fact notwithstanding, we'd still want to work with the community. If there's a stormwater management issue and it's within the budget, to solve it. This is not trying to be used as a hostage thing. This is just the project's the scope of the project is going to dictate the budget. If, after the work is done, there's money left over to kind of help the community, that would be done too. And that's often done. There's no.
Mike,
Thanks, Mark.
yeah,
Clara?
Mike, was there? Oh, yeah, I just wanted to check. No hands
No
raised.
comment.
I didn't want the meeting to end without mentioning that staff did have an opportunity to meet with the property owner for the gas station. And he, and for those that were at the meeting, and staff, I'll invite you to chime in, but it appeared that he hadn't really thought about the EIP program, was kind of hadn't had time to consider it. So I think this is a new consideration for him, that there might be that economic incentive. So I just wanted to share that. I agree, there just in general, there are challenges, and the comprehensive plan tries to incentivize with density and options, parcel consolidation, but as we all know, that it's still very challenging.
Okay. Thank you, Clara. Any other comments from task force members? Questions? I know it's, Robert?
So, Clara, on that, was it the gas station owner thinking the inverse situation where he might acquire both properties and have a tax incentive that way versus him selling?
I think it had just been a new consideration for him. And I think when he perhaps when he'd been approached previously, the EAP program had not been adopted yet at that point.
Just one more quick.
Go ahead.
Just one more quick, if I may. Mark,
Sure.
have you talked to the Annandale CBC?
No, we're just at the SSPA process. We're just the beginning.
Okay, and I certainly understand as a private owner, representative of a private owner, your desire to do what you want to do. I appreciate that.
All right. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to reiterate what Bill was saying. I think earlier about considering the whole parcel, as the Board of Supervisors had directed us to. I think it's going to be, at least for me, it's hard for me to imagine this going forward without considering what happens to the gas station property. So that's my closing thought for tonight.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, well, Mark, thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate that. Appreciate your addressing our questions. We will adjourn in a few minutes. We will meet again in 2 weeks on April 14th. Michael, will we have will you have circulated or made public a staff recommendation in advance of that meeting, so we have a chance to review it and consider it?
That is our goal.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That'd be
Thank
good.
the applicant.
Mark, we'd appreciate having your feedback on that as well when that is published. Are there any other matters before the task force this evening?
Thank you very much. As there's a lot of time about people's lives, and appreciate it. And I know it's whatever the position is, all community serving, and I appreciate the good dialogue tonight, and I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Abstain. The ayes seem to have it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. Be safe. Be well.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.